Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Taking a Proactive Approach to Combat Ransomware. My name is Karen Ambrose Hickey, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm on the marketing team here at Druva, and will introduce our speakers shortly. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping items. This webcast is meant to be interactive, so please ask questions using the questions pane, and we'll take the questions at the end of the webinar. This webcast is also being recorded, and we'll send you an email with the recording details later next week. Please note that you can resize your screens by pulling on the lower right corner. Also, we've provided you with some resources that you can find in the upper right. If you have follow-on questions or if you want copies of the slides, please email me at webinars@druva.com. And for those of you that are just joining, welcome to Taking a Proactive Approach to Combat Ransomware. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Starting off, we have John Shire, a senior security expert at Sophos. John is a popular presenter at security events and is well known for the clarity of his advice, even on the most complex security topics. John doesn't just talk the talk, he also gives hands-on technical support and product education to Sophos partners and customers. I also have Shay Verma, who's going to be talking from a practitioner's point of view and how our customers are less worried or impacted by ransomware. Shay's our Senior Product Marketing Manager at Druva. He has over 16 years of experience in product management and marketing, driving initiative around product launches and positioning for both hardware and software. He leads our product marketing for InSync, the company's flagship product for protecting and governing data on endpoint devices. He also has very deep expertise on the challenges that enterprises face in managing the amount of data, including the security of that data. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to John to talk a little bit about what is ransomware.
Thanks, Karen. So good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are in the continent. Let's talk a little bit about ransomware and define it for everybody. I'm sure most people know what it is, but for those of you who don't, ransomware is quite simply a piece of malware that holds your files hostage. They do this usually, and we'll talk about some of the differences and nuances about the different types of ransomware and a little bit of history. But they do this usually by encrypting your files and holding the decryption key hostage, and that's really where the ransom comes in. Once they have your files encrypted, and they then demand money to basically get that decryption key back and get access to your files again. And so because of that, that's why it's called ransomware. There's also the fact that there's different types of ransomware out there. There's been a very long history of ransomware. This goes back as far as 1989. We'll look at that as well. But really, in a nutshell, that's exactly what ransomware is. It's a way of basically locking down your files while your computer is still available and useful to you, except for your files are no longer available. So I'll pass it off to Shay, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the history of ransomware.
Thanks, John. Ransomware, as John mentioned earlier, has been around for a while now. But what has made it really popular is that in the recent years, paying of ransom has really caused an uptick in the trends of ransomware that we're seeing in the organizations that we are dealing with. Something that is really weird about this is that in 2016, we've had roughly a payout of over $209 million. And the uptick in just for the short period of time that we have been in 2016 is about 300% more than that of what we saw in 2015. And I think this is primarily due to the fact that organizations are not equipped with tackling ransomware, and because the data that is being targeted is of extreme importance to a lot of the organizations that need access to the data on a 24/7 basis, are actually succumbing towards giving the ransom in exchange for their data back, and that has really caused the uptick in ransomware that we have seen in 2016. And as I mentioned earlier, the increase is roughly about quadrupled, or about 300% more. And really, a lot of the organizations are giving in to the ransom demands of of these attackers, and that is what has made it extremely popular. One thing that I'd like to mention is that if you see the attacks across industries, really no one is spared. These days, if you pick up if you try to log into your computer and read the news, there's hardly a day that goes by where you cannot find where it's extremely easy to find an article on how an organization has been hit by ransomware and how the organization has either succumbed to paying the full amount or has not been able to recover their data back. And if you look at the slide over here, we see that a lot of the organizations that are being hit, there is no one specific industry that is being left out. It could be hospitals, healthcare, all the folks that have very sensitive information. Police departments are also being targeted, where a lot of their data is being held hostage. And even education, in the education industry, where schools are being required to give up money for the exchange of their data. They are also not being spared. And what's interesting around with ransomware is the fact that the systems that are impacted are not specifically Windows-based, but we're seeing Macs, Linux, and more so on Android devices, specifically those that have not been updated with the latest patches or operating systems on the Android smartphones and tablets. And so all in all, ransomware attacks are really pervasive, and the industry is not specific to any particular type, but instead the attackers are going after those organizations or industries or enterprises that have sensitive information and that and those that need access to their data 24/7. Those are the folks that are being really targeted. And a lot of them are, as I mentioned earlier, giving into ransom just primarily because they don't have the right systems or equipped with the right way of countering ransomware.
Thanks, Shay. John, can you give some specific examples of ransomware attacks on organizations?
Yeah, so we'll get into that. I'll get into the specifics of the different variants that we see in a little bit. But I want to really talk about how we got here, right? Because I think it's partly an interesting story, and it helps to show the evolution of this malware and how the criminals are, looking at what we're doing from a defensive standpoint and modifying their behavior and then basically retooling their malware to get better and better. And, the very first incidence of what we would actually call ransomware occurred back in 1989 with the AIDS Trojan. And this was very simply something that was mailed out back before the internet was, the World Wide Web was ubiquitous. This was mailed out on diskettes to about 12,000 people. And when you installed this program, it would actually ask for ransom, as you can see in the screenshot here. And so, that one was the very first one that we know of, at least that, has come to our attention. And then ransomware itself and this type of malware kind of went away for a while. But as we look back about, I'd say something like 7-8 years ago, things like fake AV started cropping up. And fake AV, for a lot of people who are familiar with this, was you'd get a browser pop up that would say, hey, we've detected a threat on your machine, and we can clean it up. And then it would show you, with, as you can see on the right hand side of the slide there, here's all the vendors out there that don't detect it, but we do. And there's 4 different, I believe it's 4 different ones there that they detect. And this is all the criminals that are saying, we've got this. Now, you didn't have an infection prior to this. This was the actual infection. And so what they would do is they would offer to clean up your computer for a cost. And it was usually anywhere from $50 to $100. And somewhere along the line, there was a crossing over point between actual fake AV and ransomware, because fake AV became one of those things that was easy for people to ignore, because you could actually, there was nothing really wrong with your computer. You could reboot into a safe mode with an external bootable AV. Even your current AV could have just grabbed it and killed it. And so the profit on fake AV was not there because enough people were able to spot it. The graphics weren't great. The language wasn't great. It wasn't the kind of thing that was difficult to spot for even a lay user. And so as we can see in this trends graph here, at some point there was a crossing over where ransomware itself, the proper crypto ransomware that we're used to today, really took off. And one of the things that happened in between was the police locker stuff. And again, police locker only locked your Windows session, and there was a way of getting out of that. But what this introduced was the idea of geographical malware, where they would present you with some malware from the country of origin that you were surfing from. And so based on GeoIP, it would say, okay, you're coming from the US, so I'm going to present you with an FBI scam. As you can see here, this is an OS X version of this. And there are, this is not just a Windows problem, as Shay said. There's variants out there for the different operating systems. We've seen some for Linux, we've seen some for Mac, Windows, and even the Android operating system. But this police locker stuff is really what was the nexus of the new crypto ransomware stuff. And the very first one that we saw that had, that kind of hit the streets and had a really huge impact was CryptoLocker. And so a lot of us heard about CryptoLocker back in September 2013 when it first hit. And this was the sort of the nexus and the grandfather of all the crypto ransomware that we see today, because out of this is where a lot of the other variants came from. And within a very short period of time, people were because we hadn't seen this before. People were paying the ransom, and these guys got very rich. And I'll show you the next slide in a second, which shows you exactly how rich these guys got. But the fact of the matter was, these guys were doing ransom right. They were locking your files with no way of you reversing that, because they were using proper encryption, the same stuff that we use to protect our legitimate files as corporations. And they were also good business folks in the sense that if you paid them the ransom, they would give you back the key. That's just a good business model, and you want to be known as the person who's going to give you back your key for your files if you actually pay the ransom. And so we kind of tracked what they were doing, and when we looked at the the Bitcoin wallet where they were dumping all the ransom proceeds, at first they were dumping it all into one wallet, and this is where we got this screenshot from. 31,000 Bitcoin. That time in 2013, it's around November 2013, was worth about $34 million. And so these guys were making incredible amounts of money, hand over fist, and this really led to having better ability to pay for distribution through botnets, through exploit kits, better graphics, better phishing campaigns, all of that kind of stuff, translation, and again, the geographic nature of this malware where they were tailoring their messages for a local audience. And so this kind of brings us to the modern day and where we're at with the different types and the different variants, which is what I'm going to talk about now. And the first one, there are some nuances and there are some iterations on each theme, but there's really three different kinds of ways that you can get ransomware and what it does in your system. And one of them is this file table locker, right? So the MFT, the master file table, or the MBR sometimes. What this particular ransomware will do is it will rewrite that master file table and point to itself, and then that's where it'll demand the ransom. Now, this isn't seen as often, and part of that really leads to the fact that when this happens, you don't have the access to your computer anymore, and so you need to go somewhere else and get to some other computer and input the .onion site and do your payment that way. So because you don't have access to your computer, the barrier to entry for people that aren't as familiar with things like Bitcoins and Tor, it's a little bit higher, and so it doesn't have as great an ROI. But Petya is one of these things that we saw earlier this year that was using this familiar theme. Shay talked about some Android ransomware as well, and we do see that from time to time, although thankfully for those of us who use Android, it's not a very prevalent and prominent threat, especially in North America. But for those of you who, very rightly so, like to root your devices for the right reasons, you need to be on the lookout for things like this, because being able to strip away the security that's inside the operating system and then allowing yourself to go get apps from third-party markets can, in some cases, leave you susceptible to ransomware infection on Android. But like I said, luckily for us on North America, this is not as prevalent. So how do you get this stuff? Well, it usually comes through, and the more familiar campaigns nowadays are the ones that come through in spam. And this is an example of a spam that we picked up in our spam trap for a Wells Fargo piece of spam. And, it contains very legitimate looking email. So, again, being able to try to fool the user in a way that's going to leave them thinking that this is legitimate because all the imagery is correct, the language is correct, there's no spelling or grammar mistakes, or at least there's very, very few of them nowadays. And it looks really legitimate. And the fact that, these guys are crooks, they're just going to go ahead and steal all the imagery from Wells Fargo anyways. And this is, so it's not Wells Fargo doing a bad thing. Their brand is just unfortunately being used as the middleman in the ransomware game. And so if you do click on that link, which we have done, you then get taken to a site. And this site, again, looks quite legitimate because they're, again, using all the imagery and the language and the proper branding of the brand that they're ripping off. And banks are a good target for this, as are things like Apple and other social media outlets out there. And, oftentimes when you get to this point, there's probably a drive-by download that either takes you to an exploit kit or actually downloads the ransomware itself at that point. Next would be the phishing type stuff. And this is an example of a phish that contains an invoice attachment. This particular one was actually serving as a Locky ransomware, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Locky is one of those prevalent ones that we see today that, between Locky and CryptoWall are probably most of the infections. There's another one, CryptXXX, that's coming up and to the fore now. And we'll talk a little bit about Tesla Crypt right near the end. But this invoice, again, trying to lend an air of realism. If you're somebody who's in finance that's receiving this, it's your job to actually open and process invoices. So your sort of spam detector might be a little bit less fine-tuned when it comes to things like this. But if you click on the attachment, what would happen is you would get a document with largely a macro in it. Here's another example of one that has an IRS tax report. And this one actually came out during tax season. So I pulled this out of the spam trap back in April. And it said, here's your 2015 tax return report. And so they also use, the criminals use the seasonality of things like tax season, like the holiday shopping season for sending you spam on shipping notifications, right? UPS, FedEx, DHL, all those types of companies. You're probably doing online shopping during the holiday season, so you're probably expecting shipping notifications. You'll get some during, on Valentine's Day. You'll get V-card spams or e-card spams. And the worst ones are during natural disasters, right? You'll get all sorts of fake Red Cross donation spams out there that basically lead you to trouble. And when you get one of these documents, when you open it up, there's usually some sort of call to action as well to, run a macro. So these guys don't have to be really super uber hack stores. They just need to get you to click on something at some point and let you kind of do the damage for them. And what this one says, if the encoding is incorrect, which it just looks like gibberish, well, just click on this macro, run it, and we'll fix the encoding for you. Well, when you do that, what actually happens is, you get basically you get ransomware at that point, or it could exploit a vulnerability, or it could just download a package from the internet that will then run and install ransomware on your system. So this kind of stuff is, again, it's easy to spot sometimes, but fact of the matter is many businesses use macros as business automation tools. And so, again, people have that familiarity and trust with working with documents because document malware has actually not been around for a long time. But it is resurging now, and it's being used to serve malware. And the final example of this type of phishing that leads to ransomware is this one example here, which we spotted about a month ago, which goes to show the criminality, the underground networks that these guys have. The reason I've sanitized this particular screenshot is because there is an actual name and postal address, so a real name and real postal address of somebody who is being sent this email saying they bought something. There's a link to a company. There's a whole bunch of them that we got. They were all to different companies saying they owed money. And so because now it has your actual name instead of Dear Sir or Madam, and because it has your real postal address, you're more inclined to think that this is possibly legitimate or an error. And, maybe my wife or my husband or my kid bought something and now I'm on the hook for it. And so people were calling these companies saying, hey, I never bought anything from you. Why are you sending me this? And what we think occurred here is this happened in the UK. So all these addresses are UK based. What we think happened here is there was a quite large data breach last year in the UK, and where a lot of personally identifiable information, PII, was stolen. So names, email addresses, postal addresses, phone numbers, email, all that kind of stuff. And we believe that this was then sold to another criminal gang who then used it in this phishing campaign to then send you ransomware. And so you can see how these different groups can work together. One group who specializes in data breaches will get this dump, and then they'll sell it to somebody else who specializes in some other type of criminal activity on the internet. So let's walk through two of the most prime examples that we see today. And the first one's going to be Locky. And what we see with Locky here, there's a few things I'll point out in the slide. The first thing being the affiliate ID. And we think that the Locky gang are the same people that were behind the Drydex banking Trojan, because they were using affiliations as well and affiliate IDs in their sort of pyramid scheme of criminality. And basically what this is I've got a piece of ransomware, a piece of malware. I want to distribute it far and wide. So I'm going to say to Shay and Karen, I say, okay, you guys here, I'm going to give you my software, and you guys are going to, distribute it to as many people as you want. You're going to charge, let's say, $300 as a ransom, but you're going to kick back 50% of the proceeds to me, and you're going to keep 50%, and then the pyramid scheme keeps growing. And that's really what the affiliate is meant to do. It's meant to track that kind of stuff. And also the DGA, the domain generation algorithm, which is the basically the call home URI that the crooks use to fetch that public key to encrypt all your files. That was unique per affiliate ID as well. And so that kind of leads us to believe that maybe the Drydex gang is behind that, because Drydex is on its way out, it seems, and this Locky stuff is quite alive and well. Which also is a good tip for those of you who manage web filters. If you're seeing a lot of garbage domains being accessed by your computers, and these alphanumeric or 10-digit or 10 to 12-digit long URIs, it's probably a good bet that there's some sort of command and control problem in your network. There's a couple service host flags, registry host flags, of persistence, and some persistent reboots, and basically some service startups as well to kind of hide. So it will hide as run DLL or service host or something like that. The sleep timer is interesting as well, because that's meant to evade sandboxes. So basically, when you use that, when you open that document, run the macro, it'll sit there and do nothing until the sandbox goes, yeah, it's clean, let it go. And then once it actually lands on your computer, it'll detonate and do all its damage. And then finally, the Russian flag there, which, correlation isn't causation. But what this means is if I land on a Russian operating system, don't do anything at all. And the way that Locky works is it works on basically a whitelist, right? So it looks at all these types of user-generated content, and it will only encrypt this kind of stuff. So what that does is it preys on the stuff that people find is most important and interesting, and then the kind of stuff that people are more likely to pay for. And so with this model, they've been quite successful, and that's really how most of these ransomware variants have operated, is with this whitelist model. Now we'll flip over to CryptoWall, and for those of you, if this means anything to you, you probably have a chance of getting a job in some of this labs. But I'm not going to talk about this entire slide. I just want to point out two things. I want to point out at the top, and this is again the CryptoWall 4 header, which is the top is the MD5 hash of the public key, the unique public key that was used to encrypt stuff. And what this means is they're trying to build efficiencies into their products, right? So now that they've got a good way of making robust encryption, because they're not knitting their own, they're actually using, the same crypto API hooks that Windows uses and that we use for, protecting data. Because every time they have tried to knit their own crypto, it's always ended in tears, and we've been able to reverse it. But that MD5 hash is there for efficiency. It's there to say, okay, I've already touched this file, move along. They want to rip through your disk as quickly as possible and encrypt as much stuff as possible before you have a chance to, let's say, unplug your computer or do something else that might impede that. And so that's why they put that there. And the bottom bit, which is the encrypted blob, so the very last blue color there, shows that they don't need to encrypt a lot of the file. So if ever you've encrypted a file, a very large file, or encrypted a whole disk, you know how long it takes. And so again, for expediency and efficiency, they're only going to encrypt, the first 4K bytes or the first, whatever 40K bytes or whatever the number is. It changes from variant to variant. But what that means is it's enough to render the file unusable for most cases. If you're doing that to large, CAD files, for example, that's going to be trouble. But if you do it to a JPEG and you got a proper hex editor and you know what you're doing, you can kind of lop off that whole chunk right up to the end of the encrypted blob, and you'll get a picture with missing the top of the head, for example, right, if it's a picture of me. So not elegant, not easy to do for most people, but that's how these guys have built in these efficiencies and these checks and balances in for their software, because they're continuing to iterate and try to figure out how can we get the most ROI and the best bang for our buck. And then finally, what CryptoWall 4 did, and it's sad that we're actually, giving these things version numbers now, but what they did is they switched to an exclude model. So what they found was that their list of include files, the ones that they were targeting, was sometimes possibly missing things. Maybe there's a program out there, a CAD program out there they'd never heard of, but that would be really good to encrypt if you're, going after Caterpillar, for example, and they're using something that's maybe custom or unique, and they were missing those. And so they went to the exclude model, basically encrypt absolutely everything on the disk except for certain paths, certain file extensions. You don't want to destabilize the system. You want to make it usable. And the middle bit, which is interesting, the icons DB and the thumbnails DB, what that does is it still renders all of the icons, even though the file's encrypted, it still renders all the icons. It looks like a Word document. It renders all the thumbnails. It looks like your kid's first birthday pictures, right? So two things. On first glance, it doesn't look like there's a problem. And two, it gives you a reminder of the things that you lost. So if it is a picture of your kid's first birthday party, now you know all the pictures that you lost, and you're pulling at the heartstrings. You might be more likely to pay up at that point. All right, so now those are the two most prominent examples of what we're seeing out there. I mentioned TeslaCrypt earlier. So TeslaCrypt basically shut down operations last week, and we're not sure why. There's a lot of speculation out there, but these guys actually did give up the key, which is the first time we've ever seen this kind of operation. CryptoLocker was actually shut down by law enforcement and some vendors. So because they were able to get the private servers to access the private keys, they were able to release those and basically help people that may have had CryptoLocker infections at that point. But this was a change of heart for whatever reasons from the crooks, and they basically shut down and released the master key. But don't expect that and don't use that as a strategy for preventing against ransomware. And so in closing, I'll give you some tips. And actually, Karen, am I on the tip slide right now?
Yes, you are, John.
Okay, great. So I've made it all the way through. So there's a lot of I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but there's a lot of common sense stuff that you can do, and a lot of things that maybe we are doing already, but could be doing a little bit better. So don't overprivilege yourselves and your network. So you don't need write access to everything in your network, and we all do this. Even at Sophos and many companies, we kind of give everybody access to everything just because it's easier that way. But this can be stopped in its tracks and can be stopped from doing a lot more damage if we don't overprivilege our users. And the network segregation means that if we have proper boundaries put around our computers and our servers, then maybe some of this stuff can't hop around as much as it should or could. And so these little things are really important. They may seem like nothing, but in the grand scheme of things can add up to a lot better protection. The patching issue is one that, we still haven't learned and aren't doing well enough. And that's the piece that, if you have a fully patched system that includes your operating system and all your applications, it's much harder to exploit that kind of system. And so the document exploits that I talked about earlier with Locky, for example, just simply will not work for most cases. These guys aren't using 0 days. It's important to point out. The reigning champ of exploits these guys were using was from 2012. They've actually moved on this year to an exploit from August of 2015. And so that's the basically the latest one they're using in any kind of volume nowadays. So if only we just patch all our stuff, a lot of the exploits that are being used to give you ransomware are simply just going to not work. And then finally, you need to have those backups. And those backups need to be kept offline and away from your network. So once you do create that backup, make sure that, you test it, right? Because there's nothing better than a backup. Nothing worse than a backup that doesn't work. So create your backups, test them, and then finally take them off-site and offline. Because that way, crypto ransomware won't be able to get its dirty little paws on it. Because these things will spider through your network. They actually are, as we saw with CryptoWall and both CryptoWall and Locky, they look for backup files. And so get them off the network, and then that way you'll have, the last ditch effort is going to be to restore that backup. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Shay.
John, thank you so much. I'm actually going to say that this is a good time to have Shay back on how organizations can take proactive and remediation steps against ransomware.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, John, as well. So it's interesting to see that, to see certain cases that have occurred recently. In fact, just last week, a Kansas hospital was attacked by ransomware. It happened on the 18th of May, actually, last week. And it's interesting to see, as I mentioned earlier, this organization or Kansas hospital did pay up their ransom to get their data back. But unfortunately, the attackers tried to request for more money. And at this point, I believe they're not paying for that. In fact, one of our viewers mentioned this as well. So there's a whole gambit of responses to ransomware. Some have given their money completely and have gotten their data. Many have given money and did not get back their data. And some are just plain out refusing. So there's a whole slew of responses to ransomware. And we're seeing consistently that a way to protect against ransomware, or at least mitigating the effects of ransomware, is to have a solid backup solution in place, as John mentioned earlier. There are all kinds of backup solutions available. However, the things that we are seeing, especially when it comes down to ransomware attack, you need the ability to A, back up your information, B, back it up to an offsite place, so that or utilizing a cloud solution, so that as ransomware traverses the network, you still have the ability to recover it. And the key thing here is regular time indexed snapshot backups, but which basically means that you have the ability to take regular, as frequent as your organization demands the backups to be, and making sure that there are snapshots of the files and versions of the files. You have the ability to recover that. You have the ability to have retention policies in place so that if in case the employee leaves the organization, you have the ability to recover that information. And in case of ransomware, if that file is infected with that particular employee, then you have the ability to get rid of that particular file as well. And the key thing here is also offsite data storage, right? So utilizing a cloud solution where you have the ability to store that information in a different network, or as John as well mentioned, segmenting networks helps a lot. So backups is more a proactive step that a lot of our customers are taking today as a solution towards ransomware, because naturally, if you can recover the information safely, you really don't have to pay the ransom to even risk not getting your information back, even despite the fact that you've paid for it. So naturally, not only backup is a proactive solution, and as a remediation step, having access to that information 24/7, being able to restore the information during a malware attack is also important. So having access to that information from an IT perspective or from a user perspective to be able to restore that is important as well. And then finally, once you have been able to restore that information, searching for the infected file, once you know that which file has been infected, searching for that across the organization, not only just on laptops and desktops, but also on smartphones, tablets, mobile phones, smartphones, and data that resides in cloud application becomes extremely important, because if that file still exists within the organization, then there is a good chance that that file may get executed and you're back to square one. So searching for that particular file in a backup solution and remediating against it, deleting against it, becomes extremely important to clean up your system. So for that, if you look at the backup solution that you want to have, you want to ensure that it is a comprehensive solution. From the perspective of you are able to secure the data that exists in the enterprise, not only on laptops and desktops, but also on mobile devices. You should have a solution that is agnostic to operating systems, Linux, Macs, Windows-based systems as well. You should be able to get access to all the information that resides on those operating systems, devices as well. And then you have the ability to provide granular settings where you can define exactly what kind of information you would like to back up. Business critical information, mission critical information across users is extremely important to back up. So if you have the ability to back up information off of emails, specify certain folders, and while every user has their own way of managing their endpoint, giving access to users to modify what kinds of folders they would like to back up as well, so that all this information that makes them productive on a daily basis and on the go is essentially backed up and is available to them at any given point 24/7, even in the case of a malware attack. And then finally, granular frequency settings. Basically, you want to ensure that you have the ability to back up information at very regular intervals. You should be able to do it as long as anywhere between 2 to 3 backups a day should be sufficient. But if your organization does have very sensitive information, then more frequent backups are really recommended. You can go up to even as often as 5 minutes. And as I mentioned earlier, it has to be a comprehensive solution. Desktops and laptops to the minimum need to be covered. Mobile devices, smartphones and tablets should be covered. More interestingly enough, there could be an infected file that lives in a cloud application as well. Making sure that you have the ability to back up information that resides in cloud applications that could be infected as well. So making sure you have versions of that off of cloud applications such as Google Apps or Office 365 or Box. These are repositories these days for a lot of employees as well. So you want to make sure that business critical information is backed up even in those repositories, because if there's an infected file over there, you want the ability to know where that file is, in which repository, and essentially being able to remediate or deleting against it. And then during a ransomware, I think one thing that's really critical is the ability to get access to the information that resides in the backup system. So if you have a cloud-based solution, for example, then that could be a very good opportunity for protecting against ransomware, primarily because A, it is offsite, and B, there are very good tools out there available to you to make sure that the information is accessible. And restoration of that information as a remediation step becomes extremely critical. So ensuring that the system that you do utilize is simple to use, has the ability to not only restore from an IT perspective or an IT manager, but also users have the ability to gain access to that information. Because naturally, if you are in a situation where you are attacked and there is a successful intrusion, then your users should be able to still gain access to that information while the IT department scrambles around in trying to restore everything, in trying to make sure it is cleaned out of the system so that there is no second use or second attack of a ransomware. So basically, accessing to that information is important. Once you have control over the situation, when it comes to a successful intrusion, then naturally the cleanup process begins, and you want the ability to search for all those files that were infected. There are lots of good tools out there that will help you identify that, and then naturally you want to be able to search across your end users. No matter where the information resides, whether it's an endpoint or in the cloud application, you want to basically find that that needle in the haystack and be able to delete that so that it doesn't, so you don't get attacked again. And so naturally, the solution should be comprehensive from the perspective of searching across all endpoints and cloud applications that you utilize within your organization. And there are solutions like Druva InSync that we currently provide that would be able to protect the information across all the data repositories and naturally provide federated search capabilities on top of that to search for any file that was naturally infected by any malware. All in all, I would like to leave you with a few key takeaways in trying to protect against ransomware and also remediating against ransomware. Basically, as John mentioned, I would like to echo some of his sentiments here. Updating security software is of utmost importance. And one thing to note here, though, is that no matter how much you update your security software as well, these ransomware guys are getting very smart, and naturally they are a little bit ahead of the updating of security software because they find newer vulnerabilities on a daily basis and find new ways of attacking. So naturally, you want to update your security software often, regularly. All your antivirus and anti-malware software is updated. Operating systems are updated. And naturally, patch, as we mentioned earlier. It's extremely important. All the plugins are covered and making sure your software is updated. Second thing is end user awareness. Naturally, and as John mentioned also, was that the way the ransomware infiltrates the network is primarily through end users, mostly at least, through end users clicking on some sort of a link or downloading some sort of an attachment and executing it, as a result starting the ransomware process. So educating your end users to be wary of what they open and what they click on, and naturally to not click on anything that they are not aware of. And then finally, protecting against ransomware can be done proactively by having secure backups offline, and making sure that they are time indexed, where you have the ability to restore your data, organization data, based on a timestamp, basically where you know when you were attacked by a particular ransomware, and naturally restoring all the information back to a certain point as to when before the ransomware attack. And also granular, you have the ability to granularly restore files in your organization so that you know which files are clean and you can restore that, versus like something like a bare metal restore where complete images are restored, and naturally if the ransomware was backed up as well, then naturally that gets back. So you should be able to have granular control over what you restore, and also your users have access to information during a ransomware attack so that systems really don't go down and business continues. So a little bit about ourselves. Druva is really trusted by over 4,000 enterprises, and if you look at the gambit of customers we support and we provide a solution for, they come from all walks of industry here. Specifically the healthcare industry, where specifically the industries that are very prone to have sensitive information like the healthcare industry, we provide great backup solution for them as well. We are headquartered in Silicon Valley. We have offices worldwide, and we provide 24/7 support. A couple of things that we're really proud of from Druva is that we have won many accolades from the industry when it comes down to a data protection solution and governance solution. And one of them that stands out really is the latest accolade that we got from Gartner, where we have been ranked number 1 for 3 years in a row for providing a solid endpoint data protection and governance solution, where customers have the ability to have full visibility and control over their data, no matter where it resides, either on endpoints or cloud applications. With that, I think that's all I have. Karen?
Yeah, thanks so much, Shay. Thanks so much, John. There's been questions that have come in, so I'd like to just jump straight to the questions. This first one, I think, is for John. And the question is, there are so many products out there, such as Malwarebytes, Hitman Pro, etc. In your opinion, is there any that is better than the others?
That's a bit of a loaded question because we just bought the company that provides Hitman. So we bought Surfright that provides Hitman Pro and Hitman Pro.alert. So I'm going to lean towards that. The fact of the matter is, it's a mixed bag when it comes to protection, right? You want you want a security product that's able to look at the breadth of threats that are out there historically as well as sort of proactively, right? So a strong AV is a must because we've got that history behind us where we can look at threats and go, yeah, we've seen this movie before. This is this type of threat. And then newer technologies like the Hitman Pro technologies are more of the proactive, forward-looking technologies, which work more against the anti-exploit stuff, which can work against things like CVE 2012-0158, which is that vulnerability I was talking about earlier. So the Malwarebytes stuff, the Hitman Pro stuff, if you're talking about more the cleanup tools, they can be useful as well. However, I think you need to rely on a vendor that's covering you from both ends of the proactive, forward-looking stuff as well as the more historical, old hat kind of stuff as well.
Great, thanks. Here's another question that came in. Where do you think the ransomware malware strategy is going next? And I don't know who wants to take this question.
John, do you have any insights there? I can otherwise talk to it.
Go ahead, Chase. You got some points on that?
Yeah, sure. So strategy really, first and foremost, let's step back to understand why they're being very successful. And that's primarily because of the payouts that they're receiving. And as I noted earlier, in 2016, it has really quadrupled relative to 2015 in terms of the number of attacks that they've had. So having a strategy in place would be very important to protect against it. But the question now is, where are they going next? We have started seeing a lot of inquiries headed towards IoT devices. Specifically, there has not been any threats that I'm fully aware of, but I think IoT is the next wave of ransomware attacks. There's a lot of data that is being collected over there. Automobile industry, which is part of the next wave that we've heard of that they could be targeting. But that's where we think that they're headed. But one thing you want to make sure is if everyone just has a proactive strategy towards protecting against it, then the only way to get rid of ransomware attacks, or rather a foolproof way, is by not paying them simply. If you look at what the experts say, is that not paying them will really put this to a curb or push it to the curb. And so not paying for it, and the only way you don't pay for it is by having a foolproof strategy in the organization that'll protect you against ransomware. And that is primarily having all your security software updated and your backups ready to go so that everyone can take a solid front and say, no, we're not going to pay for it. Primarily, that would be the way to stop them. And where they're headed, I think IoT devices, automobile devices, a lot of places where information is generated and kept track of that is business critical is probably the next wave where they're going to be headed.
Okay. Moving on. Here's a question. Has there been any ransomware targeted to automobiles? And I'm assuming the automobile industry. Or maybe...
Yeah, automobile. So I'm not aware of any as of today. But however, we are seeing news. We are keeping track of where it's headed. And like I mentioned earlier, it's actually a very timely question regarding where it's headed earlier. We think that IoT and automobile industry could be another way, could be the next wave where they could be hit basically by ransomware.
Great. And IoT being the Internet of Things.
I don't know, John, do you have something to say?
Yeah, Selfless Labs, we haven't really seen anything specifically related to automobiles. I mean, I guess you could say that the stunt that Charlie Miller and Christopher Lasek pulled off was a kind of ransomware where they basically locked the driver out of all the controls. But that was a proof of concept, and things like that are being dealt with at the manufacturer level. But it's like the old adage, right? Why do people rob banks? It's where the money is. And so as long as they can keep that ROI going and are able to monetize their current business model, there's no real need to change a lot. If they can get into more, which as Shay says, maybe IoT, that would make some sense as well.
Okay. Here's a question that came in, and I think it's for John. Why isn't any antivirus antivirus / anti-malware detect and stop ransomware?
Well, I think that's a bit unfair to say that there isn't any that are detecting it. A lot of the vendors out there, the security vendors out there, are detecting quite a lot of the malware that's ransomware. I guess where we're seeing some failures, I guess, is just the amount of variance of even within the single family. Every time you get hit with a piece of ransomware, it's likely that particular file, the actual file that's being used to deliver that ransomware, has never seen anywhere before. And so it makes it difficult from a looking back historical view to just say, all right, yeah, this is this piece of malware. And that's why we need to rely on other technologies. At Sophos, within our endpoint product, we've got other technologies like host intrusion prevention that does runtime behavior analysis. Very soon we're going to introduce anti-exploit technologies, right? So all of those things working together is what's needed. If you're relying just on kind of signature-based stuff, yeah, you're probably going to miss something. But most products out there, not just us, Symantec, McAfee, Kaspersky, has other technologies that you need to turn on, like host intrusion prevention, in order to protect against this stuff. It's not enough to just rely on the AV itself.
Yeah, actually, that's great, John. That's a very, very good point you make there. Also, keep in mind, and I think I mentioned this earlier as well, is that one of the things is that I think the ransomware attackers are also, to a certain degree, always going to find some sort of vulnerability in some organization. And they are getting smarter by the day, very frankly. So they will find newer ways as newer technologies emerge, which are nascent in the market, and they will find newer ways to penetrate the system. So in a way, it's always a catch-up game. That is why updating all the security and software is extremely important. But having the proactive step of regular backups really, really does help from that perspective as well. Keep in mind, by the way, even the right backup software could also, not having the right backup software could not prevent it as well. So it has to be time index snapshots. Keep in mind as well, some of the ransomware attacks that we have seen recently is that they also wait for maybe a week or two for the ransomware to get injected into the backups as well. So before they execute the ransomware attack and demand for money, because when they restore it, naturally the ransomware comes back. So taking a proactive step starting today where you know your systems are clean, getting started immediately from a backup perspective really, really helps in saying no to the attackers that money will not be available to them, because you can restore to a very clean set of information that would make your business to continue on a daily basis.
Great. Thanks. Here's another question. What's the best law enforcement department to contact, like the FBI, and would that be useful?
So that's a good question. It's tough, but a lot of the complaints that we've seen, by the way, even police departments are being targeted over here. We've seen a lot of those in recent times. Contacting the FBI will definitely is a very good step in terms of reporting it. However, based on the way these payments are made through Bitcoins, where it becomes, which is a virtual currency, it becomes very hard to actually track down these ransomware attackers as well. So while reporting anything that goes wrong is definitely the natural, logical step to take, whether it can be traced or not really remains to be seen as well, because a lot of these happen from other parts of the world. And using Bitcoin, the currency being virtual, it's just very hard to track. So it's very tough to fully respond to this, whether it'll be useful or not. But it's definitely the next logical step towards reporting it.
Yeah, and I did get some feedback from one of our attendees that the FBI has a specific group for this.
Oh, okay,
so
great.
This group is very well encrypted and actually was able to meet with them. So thank you very much for the feedback there. I did have something else on law enforcement. When law enforcement agencies arrest and hopefully convict the criminals behind these attacks, what is the maximum punishment? Perhaps lawmakers could increase the punishment to lower the risk-reward aspect of ransomware.
So I'm not aware of what the punishment is these days for it, but I will say that, like any other infringement of the law, naturally having stricter punishments would definitely help to curb this. But that can only happen and be successful to the point where if it becomes traceable, and naturally the way things are going down, it becomes untraceable quite a bit. So, I mean, the only way the experts are saying to curb this, to move this, to end this, is primarily through not paying for it. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Having the right solutions in place will be the only way to not pay for it. And the minute you stop paying for it, if everyone has that same attitude of not paying for it because they have all the right solutions in place, then naturally the ransomware attacks will not be feasible and will not be practical, and they will stop eventually.
And I'm going to try.
Yeah, and one more point
Sorry.
to that as well, Karen. So a lot of these criminals operate in countries where there are either no laws or there are no extradition agreements between the U.S. and whatever country they're operating out of. So even if you do get the FBI involved, with some cases they do get involved and they have been able to affect some change. They're just out of the reach of the law, and that's a shame.
Thanks. And I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question. And I know that there's more questions, and I'm keeping track of those, and we will get back to you. So I really appreciate that. This is a two-part. Will ransomware spread across from endpoint to server through the network? And then there's a follow-on, and how Druva can protect ransomware infected servers.
John, you want to take the first one, from endpoints to servers, or?
Yeah, I mean, the ransomware, it's not the infection itself that spreads, it's the effect of the infection, right? So the encryption itself that will go from an endpoint to a server. We haven't really seen this transition from endpoint to server in sort of a worm-like behavior yet. But yeah, so if you do have map drives and you are connected to a server that hosts data, that can get encrypted. But yeah, we have yet to see an infection jump from one to the other.
Okay, and the question is, will Druva Cloud be infected by ransomware?
That's a very good question. So Druva does not have its own cloud solution, or doesn't have its own cloud data center. But what we do is we leverage Amazon Web Services and we leverage Microsoft Azure. So when we do backups, the information gets backed up to Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. This is really a choice left up to the customer where they want to store their information. So if a file does exist and that is infected with ransomware, that will get backed up. But naturally, through Druva's solution, you will be able to search for it and clean it out and delete it. And having a time-indexed snapshot-based backup, you will be able to revert back to the version that was the clean form of your data. And naturally, restoring that back would be the helpful step. And so, all in all, we don't expect this to be of any issue.
Great. Shay and John, thank you so much for your time today. This has been great with the questions. It's been very informative, and hopefully our viewers really enjoyed it. Continue to send in questions at webinars@druva.com, and I'll see if I can get those answered and get those back to you. Again, everyone on the line, thank you so much for your time. And again, I give you a round of applause for John and Shay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks,
You're
John.
welcome. Thank you.